Check this out, guys. Sorry, mobile phone, sorry. Let's just shut that up for a minute. Just out in the van, picking this bad boy up. Stood for years and years and years. Get it back on the road, basically. So God knows what state the carbs are going to be in. Brakes are a bit seized on. Chain and sprockets are all rusty. But generally, it ain't too bad. So sorry about the mobile phone footage. That's not a word. Sorry about the mobile phone footage. I haven't got my proper camera with me, but I just thought I'd show you picking it up. Get it loaded in the van. It's early and I've only had 1 cup of coffee. Get it loaded in the van. Let's get it back to the workshop and see what's what. Okie dokie. So, back at base. It's actually, the more I look at it, the nicer you think it is. Let's get it out of the van, get it on the workbench. Let's see see what we got. No battery, so I can't see the mileage, but it looks really nice when you start getting up close and personal. Okay, let's get it out, get it on the bench and have a look. There it is. The more I look at it, the nicer it is. It's got the usual sort of bits of surface corrosion. It's been off the road for, I think the guy said 3 or 4 years, just been stood up. So it needs love. So it's going to need all its fluids changing, brake fluid, coolant, oil and filter. You know, it sort of wants going through. There's some rust in the tank, which the guy has had a go at removing. I might have to I don't know how to say, I might have to have another go at that. Yeah, it's a nice one. I think the first thing is let's pop a battery on it, because there's no battery on it. I'm curious to see how many miles it's done, and then we'll get amongst it. Let's get all the bodywork off it. Let's drain all the fluids out of it. Coolant, oil. Let's change the brake fluid. I thought when I initially pushed it, when I picked it up to get it in the van, I thought, oh my god, brakes are binding, but it turns out tyres are completely flat. I put wind in the tyres. Brakes are nice and free, so yeah, it's a step in the right direction, isn't it? The calipers are going to need going through and, you know, fresh brake fluid and stuff. Let's get a battery on it. Let's see how many miles it's done. And then we'll start tearing into the rest of it. Right, tank's off. I just wanted to show you I've got a real bright light. Maybe that's making it worse, lighting it like that. But it's sort of all mouldy and yeah, very old looking. My initial observation, obviously it's got the battery on it now. If I turn the ignition on, got no fuel pump. You can hear the fuel pump relay click. And also, can you hear that noise? Oh, actually, if you look down there, look at that servo. So here, watch that servo. See it try and move. Do it again. So the exit valve seized up. That's great. Not really. They're a pain in the arse if they're really bad. And I've got no fuel pump. First thing I'm going to do is let's disconnect the wire to the fuel pump and make sure it's getting power. And also disconnect the... God, that pipe feels really crusty. Disconnect the pipe from the carb, make sure there's no pressure in here, because the way, I'm assuming not, given that it stood so long, but the way these fuel pumps work, there's a diaphragm and some points in the end, and once it builds pressure in the fuel line, the pump won't run anyway. So let's disconnect the fuel line and make sure we've got power. I think we might be condemning the fuel pump. There's a really strong, you know that stale fuel smell? Really strong smell of stale fuel. Okay, let's get a test light and a pair of pliers and pull that pipe off. Okay, I'm really not sure the way I've lit this shot. It looks particularly good. Problem is there's no daylight. Usually I'm filming in the daylight. It's after hours really. I'm just trying to catch up with some work. So at the moment I've got this test light. One end is to ground. No, one end is to positive rather. And then the other end is into one of the two wires going to the fuel pump. So that's the ground for the fuel pump, which is fine. Now if I swap this over, I put it in the other, try and do this one-handed. So I swap that to the other wire, and then I swap my multimeter, my test light, to the negative side of the battery, and then I turn the ignition on. So the fuel pump's getting, watch. So that's your fuel pump prime time. So turn the ignition on. That's how long the fuel pump would be energized for. So the fuel pump has power. I've disconnected the fuel line going to the carburetors. So if I plug the, do this one-handed. Okay. Turn the ignition on and off. Got no fuel pump. Now, what to say? Given the strong smell of, actually, you know what I'm going to do? These fuel pumps are, it's quite rare for you to be able to get to this end of the fuel, the end of the fuel pump, which has got a, fucking hell, do I want to go down this waffle hole? With this design of fuel pump, okay, you have an electromagnet inside, and you have a sort of a metal core which is connected to a diaphragm, okay, which is like a rubber disc. The two pipes, there's an inlet pipe which is from this fuel filter which goes to the fuel tank, so fuel comes in to the fuel pump through the filter. There's an inlet valve, so fuel can pass into this chamber through the inlet valve but can't come back this way. And then there's an exhaust valve or an outlet valve, which is also, you know, it's a one-way valve. So what happens is there's a winding inside the pump here, and there's a little metal core. When the winding is energized, it pulls that metal core against a spring which draws fuel in. Now what then happens is, as that metal core goes this way, there's a set of contact breaker points in the end of the fuel pump. It opens the contact breaker points, which obviously current flow stops in the winding, and the spring inside pushes the iron core back this way, which forces fuel out. And then once the iron core's gone back this way, the points close again and re-energize the winding, and then the cycle continues. So you have this chooching backwards and forwards of the iron core, which is connected by a little metal rod to the diaphragm. So the diaphragm chooches backwards and forwards, it sucks fuel in, blows fuel out, sucks fuel in, blows fuel out. So when you hear that clicking noise from the fuel pump on your bike, that click, 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 that's this chooching backwards and forwards, and the set of points in the end opening and closing. Why am I telling you all that? Well, it's kind of useful to know how a fuel pump works, but it's very rare. In the case of these pumps, look, you can get to the diaphragm almost without exception, this one being the exception. Fuel pumps are crimped together and you can't get at the mechanism inside. It's going to be worth, because these pumps are expensive, it's going to be worth taking this off and having a look if it's all gummed up with, you know, stale fuel, and also looking at the contact breaker points in this end. Let's do that quickly. Let's get this pump off and get it on the bench. And I'm not saying I'm going to repair it, but I'm just curious to have a look inside and if we can potentially see what's going on with it. Okay, pump's off. Let's get a number 2 GIS screwdriver. It's a bit of fuel leaking out of it. It absolutely, if you had smell-o-vision, in fact I'm going to put a rag underneath it. If you had smell-o-vision, man, it smells bad. Right, some pliers. Get these fuel pipes off. I think we're definitely having new fuel pipes and a new fuel filter, regardless of what happens. Wowzers. Rock hard fuel lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is inspect the points. So the way these, is that in shot? Yeah. So the way these pumps fail in various different ways, and they present with different symptoms. The most common way is the points in the end. I'll show you the points in a second. I'll take this little cover off. The points burn out or wear away over time, and you get intermittent, the fuel pump working intermittently, and that manifests itself usually in you're riding along, feels like you're running out of fuel, you come to a stop, you're like, what the fuck is wrong with this bike? There's plenty of fuel in it. You turn the ignition back on, then you hear your fuel pump cook, or most people don't even recognise that the fuel pump's then, they can hear the fuel pump filling the carburetors back up, and then you're off to go again, and then might go for days, and then it will do the same thing again. And that's just, the points are at the point, you know, that tipping point where they're so worn out or so burnt away that sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And usually the process of turning your ignition on and off and re-energizing the points is enough sometimes to get them going again. So if you've got an intermittent cutting out problem with a carbureted bike that has a fuel pump, it's quite possibly the points in the end of the pump, because most bikes use this design of pump. But as I said, it's not often that you can get to the diaphragm. Normally this end is crimped together. But behind this plastic cover is, I'm going to have to get that wire through there so I get a bit of fighting room so I can show you. Try and make that grommet go through that way. Really? Oh, that's probably okay. So, can I get this in shot for you? So in the end of this pump is this little mechanism, and you can see the points here. And the way it works, I could do a slow-mo. If we get a pump that's working, I could film it actually working, but see this little circular piece here? That's the rod that runs through the centre of the fuel pump. The other end of this rod is connected to that diaphragm I was talking about. So as this rod goes backwards and forwards, God, it's hard to explain, but there's a little mechanism here, and it sort of goes over centre. There's a little spring, and it causes at one extremity, so when it's all the way out, it causes the points to go one way, and then when it gets to the other extremity, it causes them to click. So you get this on-off. What am I trying to say? Sorry guys, I'm doing a shit job of explaining this. The live wire, which is this one, that is providing the current flow for the electromagnet, the winding inside the body here. So that live wire is controlled by this little set of contact breakers. Okay, I mean they don't look particularly bad. I'm not sure whether that's coming out on camera. Then the other thing you can do is, theoretically, this is, because it's, how to explain? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Let's get the other end off now, so these screws, and we can get to the diaphragm, and then we can get to the rod, and we'll see if it's seized up somehow. And then there's other tests you can do, so you can, test the resistance of the winding in the pump. Generally, that doesn't ever go wrong, to be honest. It's normally the points that burn out, or the other way. I was talking about how they fail, wasn't I? One of the valves can fail. So if you've ever got a fuel pump that just constantly buzzes all the time and doesn't really seem to move any fuel, it's because the inlet valve isn't sealing. So because the inlet valve doesn't seal, it can't build pressure in the chamber and in the fuel line going to the carburetors. So the fuel pump just zzz backwards and forwards constantly and doesn't build any pressure. So they can fail mechanically, as in the valve body can be stick or broken or blocked. They can fail electrically, like literally the winding inside can fail. That's quite uncommon. And the most common point of failure is these points burn out. Fucking hell, waffling. Okay. God, it smells. Really, really stinks. I'm thinking it might just be gummed up because it really smells. Let's get rid of all these screws. It's quite a good opportunity to see inside a fuel pump because, as I've said about 25 times already, you can't normally take them apart. Right, so this is the, that's just a little, that's a seal. I nearly misspoke then, that's just the gasket. So down in here, you can see the two valves. This is the valve block. So, get it in the light. So, see how they're opposites. So basically, hang on, let me get a little pointer. It's like the fucking longest pointer in the world, but it'll do the job. So, this is a little rubber disc here. Get the light to reflect off it. And what happens is, fuel can come in this way and push past that. Helps if it's actually in shot. Fuel comes in this side, it can push past that rubber disc, lift the disc off its seat. But then when fuel tries to flow back this way, it pushes the disc, pushes against its, you know what I'm saying, and the same on this one. But you can see, if I get it in shot properly. So I was talking bollocks, it actually works the other way. This fuel would flow through from this side, so you see how I'm pushing that valve open, and in this way I'm pushing the valve open. So that's the valve block. Actually not, I thought it might be full of gooey, horrible fuel, but it's fine, it would appear. I mean, it's pretty stinky, but it's wet in there still, and so we've likely got an electrical problem. So it's nice and free, and now I can actually show you this mechanism working. So this is the diaphragm here. So this disc here is connected to the iron core inside. Okay, see how that's chooching? It's not much. This diaphragm would be sucking and then blowing, sucking and blowing. And this is spring loaded, so I can push it with my finger and it springs back on its own. The pressure of the spring I'm pushing against, that is what's responsible for the amount of fuel pressure the fuel pump can make. Because as it's filled this, as it's gone this way, okay, and let's assume there's no air inside this valve block, and it's filled up one of these chambers, the thing that is creating the pressure is the weight of this spring pushing on the fuel. Fucking waffle. Anyway, so let me show you these points opening and closing when I push on here. Get this in shot. See that? And if I let you see it from the side, if I can get that fuel pump out of the way, you can see the mechanism working with any luck. So as I push, see what I mean? That mechanism sort of, the only way I can think to describe it is it goes over center and then it immediately clicks one way. So that's broken the contact. And then that's energizing, that's made the contact, that would energize the, so when this is down, that's broken. When this is down is when it makes contact and it re-energizes that winding, pulls this rod back up, breaks the contact, drops back down with spring pressure. Okay, I think I need to get a multimeter. I wonder if those points just need cleaning. Let me just clean those points and I can put this back on the bike apart like this and we can see if this will chooch backwards and forwards. Fucking hell, I didn't know this was going to be a how does a fuel pump work video, but hopefully you're finding it interesting. Let me just get a little file and clean those points up and let's put it back on the bike. Okay, so you're going to love this. So all I've done, I've got this little flat file, nothing complicated, and I've opened the points up and I've just chooched it backwards and forwards. It's plugged in. Watch what happens when you turn the ignition on. Oh, it's fucking touching the frame there. It's a slightly different position. Going to do something really funky with the frame rate of the camera. I wonder if I can slow-mo that with my phone. Insert video here. How cool is that? So you can see the mechanism in action. So that's cool. I think we've just saved this fuel pump, which is like £150 worth of part. So it's great, isn't it? I love stuff like this. Just armed with a little bit of knowledge of how these things work. 2 minutes with a file and you've saved yourself a fucking crap ton of money. And incidentally, if ever you're in a position where the points are worn away or burnt out or something, you can buy just the points aftermarket for most fuel pumps. For here in the UK, £25 maybe for a point set. And they're almost all, it's almost like a generic part. Most of these fuel pumps are Mitsubishi, and they're, yeah, the points that they use the same points on everything. Right, let me get this fuel pump back together and we'll see if it pumps fuel. That'll be the next thing, so we can verify that the valve block and everything's working, and I can block the pipe up and make sure it'll build pressure and hold pressure. Let's do that next. Okay, so check this out. So I've got an auxiliary fuel supply to the pump. Pump's just lying in here. It's connected electrically, and this is the outlet pipe going into this jug here. If I prime the fuel pump, so I turn the ignition on and off, the pump only runs when I allow pressure out of this fuel line. So the pressure in this fuel line is not allowing the diaphragm to chooch back this way and close the points. Am I making sense? So let's energize the pump again, because you only get a few seconds. You get the idea. So that's fuel pump live now. Hopefully that's interesting and that's made some sort of sense. So we've saved the fuel pump. Get rid of that fuel pressure. So we've saved the fuel pump. Next thing is, let's have a look in the carburetors. They're probably absolutely horrendous. Get those off, get them on the bench, and I'll show you what I find. Do you like my hammer? It's my fucking 35-year-old Sykes-Pickerman ratchet. It gets used for everything. Oh man, that is tight. Excuse me, I'm going to have to take these carbs to the ground so I can push. That is seized up. Not a top tip, but these are JIS bits which have an 8mm, you can put an 8mm socket on them. If you've got something, they're really sharp, they're lovely. If you've got something that's seized in, you can do a bit of tappy tap tap on them. They're absolutely brilliant. Got some number 2s and some number 3s. Okay. Get all these screws out. I'm actually scared to look inside. Let me move you. How's that for a view? Fucking hell! I wasn't expecting that. It's fucking spotless in there. Holy fucking smoke. I was thinking, as I was taking the carbs off, that a load of you were going to say, Jim, now the fuel pump's working, why don't you just try and start it up, see what happens? And then I was going to say, it's clearly, the carb's going to be fucking hanging. There's no point in even attempting to run it. What the fuck? So he must have... How are they that clean? Fuck me, I did not see that coming. I was expecting an absolute green swamp in here. Well, that's good news. I'm going to clean them anyway, but I haven't got a massive fight on my hands. God, I was convinced that the stink of stale fuel. Well, that's a nice surprise. Anyway, it's bedtime for me. It's quite late. Let's call this the end of part 1, I think, because I've filmed quite a lot of stuff with that fuel pump. I'm not quite sure how it's going to come out in the edit, but this is probably long enough. Do the like and subscribe thing. If you find this, this sort of content valuable, it really helps if you can do the thumbs up and the like and subscribe thing. I'm constantly amazed. I don't want to waffle on about this, but I'm constantly amazed by, when you look at the metrics, only like 25-30% of you that watch these videos are subscribed. If everybody that watches this video could subscribe and give it a thumbs up, it would literally be life-changing. I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but it would enable me to be able to make more content like this, because whenever I'm filming, I'm a jobbing mechanic, fucking hell, bleeding heart. I'm a jobbing mechanic. This is how I pay my mortgage. So making YouTube videos that's why it's 10:51 at night, and I'm working on this bike now because I'm doing other mechanical repair stuff in the daytime. There isn't time to get a camera out. So it's fucking hell, whatever, I'm waffling. If you can subscribe, then subscribe. I'd appreciate it, is what I'm saying. Right, I'll see you in part 2.